Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Thanks for coming back to another episode of Love and Abuse. If you're new to this show, I will do my best to guide you through the challenges that you might be dealing with and the reason that you're listening to this show. I'm sure there's a reason that you tuned in. If you are going through some sort of relationship issue, whether that's a romantic relationship, a working relationship, a friend, family, that's what usually happens, family and romance. That's where our relationship issues are usually the most challenging. But no matter if you're new or you've been listening a while, just know that all the information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. There is a trance that we can get into, both of us, the victim, the abuser. Anyone that's listening to this show right now can get into a sort of trance. And that trance is a set of beliefs, a set of values, an understanding of how the world works, an understanding of how we're supposed to treat other people, an understanding of how we want to be treated. I would look at the trance that I'm talking about as sort of something that we don't want to change. We don't want this to change because if it changes, our world changes. And if we're not prepared for that change, we will be too scared to move forward, or we might be too scared to move forward. So there are challenges that happen in our lives that will cause us to make changes that we have no choice but to move forward. It's very similar to what my mom went through. She was in a 40-year emotionally and sometimes physically abusive relationship with my stepfather. And when she considered what it would be like to divorce him, to go off somewhere else, to live with family, to be on her own, when she considered that, the prospect was so damn frightening to her that she chose to stay in the abusive relationship. She chose to stay in the situation she was in so she didn't have to face the unknown. The problem was that she made the unknown a more frightening place than the known. She believed that leaving would be worse than staying. So she became comfortable in her discomfort. She became accepting of the unacceptable. And this is the kind of trance that we can force ourselves into sometimes. We can settle into a lifestyle or into a challenging situation because we believe that either we have no other choice or the other choice is much scarier because it's unknown or there are other factors. Leaving someone might be dangerous, for example. And so we might settle for a worst case scenario because we believe there is something that could be worse than what we're in. So my mom was in a 40-year trance, even though it was almost self-induced. She didn't want to leave, and that was her choice. At the same time, part of her not moving forward was the idea or the belief that moving forward was more dangerous. And so that created, I'm just going to use the term, a trance-like state that was a belief system. Her trance-like state was her belief system. And so we hold on to these belief systems, and sometimes we stay in situations that are not good for us, they're not healthy for us, and we choose not to move forward because either we don't know what to expect, and that's scary, or we know, quote, know what's going to happen, so that's scary too. And there are all kinds of reasons that we either might make up or believe we know that keeps us in the place we're in, keeps us in a relationship, keeps us in a mindset. And I'm not even talking about denial. I mean, my mom was in denial about a lot of things, and so she didn't want to visit those areas of her mind because visiting those areas meant the floodgate of emotions would open. And that was a scary concept for her as well. So it was easier for her to go into denial and just pretend they weren't there. I'll pretend that I'm not married to someone who literally threw a hammer at me. That's what happened to her. Fortunately, it missed, but she told me this story once. She said, he threw a hammer at me once. And when she was telling me this, she laughed. And I said, Mom, you could have died. What are you talking about? Are you serious? He threw a hammer at you? I didn't know about this. And she said, well, yeah. I said, Mom, if that hit your head, you would have died or at least been seriously injured. And for the first time, she thought about it. She imagined what would happen or what would have happened if that hammer hit her head. She imagined that she could have died. And I think for the first time, she realized just how dangerous the situation was. This is after she was out of the relationship when, they got a divorce and they moved on. They moved on separately. And that was the best thing that could have happened in this particular relationship because it was dangerous. It was very dangerous. So she considered for the first time that he actually almost killed her. That was a realization and a revelation for her, and almost proof of what I'm talking about today. It's a trance-like state, because when you're in a situation that is dangerous and you've come to accept and tolerate a lot of bad behaviors, it's almost like you don't understand the extent of some of the danger that you might be in. And I'm not talking about normal difficulties in relationships. I'm not even talking about the generic form of emotional abuse where there's manipulation and control. Yes, those are emotionally dangerous, but there's another level, there's a next level of danger that really has to be considered, especially when it becomes physical. That if you're in this trance state and you think that tomorrow is going to be like today, you have to know that tomorrow may not be like today. Tomorrow may be worse. Tomorrow may be much worse. But I don't say that to put a fear in you if you're in a dangerous situation. I don't say that to make you consider leaving the person right away. I only say that to snap you out of the trance. If you're in a trance and you think, well, nothing really bad has happened yet, I'll just continue to do what I'm doing today because it's going to be the same tomorrow. I just want you to be aware that it doesn't always mean that tomorrow is going to bring the same results. And so I am talking more extreme, dangerous situations that you just have to be aware of. And yes, this does happen emotionally too. If somebody betrays your trust, if somebody, like I've heard stories where people have written to me and said, this person that I'm with, my partner, my husband, my wife, whatever, they have cheated on me. When they cheated on me, it was devastating. And I thought it was going to be fine after they came back. They apologized and said, let's try this. I'm so sorry. Let's try this again. Let's move forward. And then they say they cheated again. And I think, wow, okay, twice, that should be enough. That twice is the indicator that they're not going to stop. The first time it happens, maybe you can recover. Some relationships do recover. A lot of relationships recover. You can talk about it. You become more transparent. You become more open and honest. There's a lot of healing that needs to take place. But some relationships can survive that and become even stronger after that. But some people, they say they're not going to cheat again, and they do. And when that happens, I have my own guidelines here, but my guideline is first time, shame on you. Second time, shame on me. Meaning, if I stick around after you do the second time, then that's me. That's my decision. And I'm making a decision to stay with somebody who, yeah, they promised not to do it again, but I gave it a shot. I wanted to find out if they were honest, and I tried again. And if they do it again, then, if I stay, then it's really my responsibility because I'm choosing to expose myself to someone who clearly their promises don't matter. Their promises to me don't matter. The first time, the promise didn't matter because they promised not to cheat. But the second time, their promise not to cheat again, now it makes all future promises null and void. And that's my own personal guideline. I'm not putting my guidelines on you. I'm not telling you that's what you have to follow, but I think it's a pretty good rule. And some people will not tolerate the first time either. I might be that person. I don't think I've ever been cheated on, but I might be that person. I might not be able to tolerate the first time because I like to believe that we currently have an open and honest, transparent relationship, my girlfriend and I. And if that happened, that would just be mind-blowing because it doesn't get any more honest and open than this. So if that happened, then something big is going on. Something happened that I wasn't aware of and she knew about. I don't know, but I definitely would have a huge decision to make. And I'm more likely not going to go forward with a relationship that has been this great, this honest, this transparent for years, and then suddenly it's not. So there's a conversation I might have to have personally if that happened to me, but only presenting this to you to understand or help you understand that there can be a trance that we're in. Even myself, there could be this trance that I'm in, that everything's going great, and that trance works for me. And so you look at your own life and you see what you have in front of you. You see any type of relationship that you're in. If somebody is hurtful to you and you think, okay, this is how bad it is, and I'm willing to work with it, then you are starting to break out of your trance. Whereas if someone's hurtful to you and you don't do anything or say anything to say, hey, this has to stop. I mean, say something that provides accountability. This has to stop. You can't keep doing this. If you say something like that, then you're breaking yourself out of your own trance. Because, again, I hear this a lot. People write to me and they say, this has been going on for 10 years. 10 years where you just hope and wish and pray or whatever the other person changes, but they don't. So you continue to stay in a situation that shows, the trend shows that they haven't changed, they haven't improved, they haven't stopped the hurtful behavior, yet you're still there. And so, and I'm not blaming you for that. This is what happens. We get into these relationships where we actually care about the people, even if they're hurting us, we still care. And we want the person who doesn't hurt us back. We want them back in our lives. Where did they go? They started off so kind and gentle and friendly and fun, and now they're not. I've said this before, but who they are today is who they are. That's not pleasant to hear, but that's what it is. Who they are today is who they are. But that's good too, because if they are changing, if they are healing, if they are stopping the bad behavior, then who they are today is who they are. And if you look at them and say, whoa, that's really nice that they are stopping that bad behavior, you might have some doubts, which you should. You should have doubts. If they stop the bad behavior, you should have doubts, because you need to see repetition of good behavior. And you need to see when they used to get triggered, do they still get triggered by the same stuff? This is always the test, by the way. If you want to test if the person that's in your life that's healing or claims to be healing, if they say they're getting better or they have changed, then do the exact same things that used to trigger them. Do what used to trigger them, say what used to trigger them, because they will show you who they are. They will show you how much they've healed. Now, you may know I run the Healed Being program that helps emotionally abusive people change and heal, and it's a very effective program. It's worked for a lot of people, and it works for basically everyone that takes it. However, they can't always save their relationships. They become more improved as long as they follow the guidelines, follow the lessons, but it doesn't always save the relationship, because there's a point where someone who has been hurt for so long has a threshold and they lock up their heart and they don't want any more of that person in their life. This is what happens a lot, is that someone can lock up their heart and say, no more. I've had enough of who you are. And they will lock them out. And so that happens too. Now, the person who has been abusive, who has hurt, emotionally abusive, physically abusive, no matter what, the person who has hurt and is changing, is taking a new path in their life, is healing some old emotional triggers, is improving or evolving their coping mechanisms, those people can be brand new and they can show up as completely different people, which they should. When you heal from being emotionally abusive, you are a different person. You can't be the person you were anymore. I mean, it's not even possible when you've healed, because the person you were when you were abusive, it makes you ill. It makes you feel so bad because you finally developed empathy and you finally realized how much you're hurting someone else. And that's what happens when you heal from being the emotionally abusive person. You stop hurting people you love because you realize that's just awful. You just feel awful for being that person. And so that's what happens when somebody changes, is they feel awful inside and they need to heal that. They need to heal how they feel and heal their coping mechanisms and heal their emotional triggers to the point where they're just completely different. And that's how you can tell, is that when somebody is healing, you see different behavior that is very unusual, very different than who they were. And that is surprising to you. And so that's a good gauge for you if you are just totally shocked about how they're showing up. And it's not because they've convinced you to believe them that they've changed. It's because you see the changes with your own eyes. You feel it. You see that they're different people. And again, that can be a good way to tell if someone's actually changed. And of course, I have other episodes on love and abuse. Have they changed or are they faking it? That's the episode that you might want to listen to if you have a question about that. But I'm bringing all this up today because the trance-like state that one can get in can be so powerful sometimes that it's nearly unbreakable. And I'm talking about either person, the victim of abuse, the perpetrator of abuse. Both of them can get into a trance-like state. And what I mean by that is, let's just say the abuser hasn't changed for their life. This is how they are. They show up, they hurt you, whether it's intentional or not. They just have these coping mechanisms and they don't know how to deal with stress. They don't know how to deal with disagreements. They don't know how to deal with conflict. And so they become hurtful. And the main reason one might become hurtful is to protect themselves. They want what they want. And if what they want isn't achieved, if they can't get it, if you do something different than what they want, it feels like a threat to them, or at least in some cases, it can feel like a threat. And because they don't know how to deal with threats, at least in an emotionally intelligent way, they respond with hurtful behavior. And that hurtful behavior is either defensive or protective. And they defend themselves by either pushing you away or making you believe you're the bad person or wrong and that you are responsible for the problems. And they will be defensive so that the spotlight is on you. And they will also be protective, just out and out hurt you. They will just say hurtful things. They will do physically hurtful things just to, again, push it back onto you. They don't want to make it their problem. They don't want to have to deal with the problem. They don't want to have to take responsibility for the problem because it's way too vulnerable. And so they get into this trance-like state of not realizing they're the problem, at least a lot of them. Some of them do. Some of them know that they are the problem and they don't care. Some of them don't care and some of them do. It varies. There are conscious manipulators. There are unconscious manipulators. And well, that's what I call them. They're abusers, manipulators, controllers. They are conscious or unconscious, and they are intentional or unintentional. And so these are the people that we connect with, that we live with, that we partner up with, family, friends. There are all kinds of people out there. The people that are most willing to be vulnerable and express what's deep down inside them are the least likely to be abusive. And that's an important concept. If somebody is willing to really dive in and share a deep vulnerability within them, they're less likely to be abusive because they're more willing to express what they fear showing the world. And for you to be trusted enough to see that vulnerability inside of them, that is a huge step forward in their healing. But a lot of abusive people do not want to go there. They do not want to have to expose their vulnerabilities like that. They don't want to show you their insecurities. They don't want to show you their fear. And this reminds me of a visual concept I just thought of today, actually, of a dam. So a dam would be their resistance. So a dam is someone's resistance. And that resistance is showing you their vulnerabilities. Their vulnerabilities, their fears, their insecurities, things that embarrass them, things that make them feel ashamed, that's all the water behind the dam. If the dam breaks, that breaks them. It shakes their foundation. So what they do is make sure that dam never breaks. They reinforce it. They continue to build upon it, and they layer it up so much that it will never break. And this is like their permanent state. That state of mind, that emotional state, that emotional control is how they survive in the world. That is their coping mechanism. They resist being vulnerable to the point where you will never see what's behind the dam. And the fear and the insecurity that they're holding back, it's so heavy. It's so heavy. And I speak from experience. That's exactly what I did for many years. I held back all my fears, all my vulnerabilities. And ironically, I believed that I was more expressive and more emotionally connected than most people. And in some ways, I was emotionally connected and, compared to a lot of people. But at the same time, I couldn't express my fears or my insecurities because I didn't want somebody to not like me. I didn't want somebody to see me as inferior or stupid or ugly or any of the insecurities that we can have. And I put all that behind the dam. I repressed it. I stuck a huge emotional wall so that nobody would see that. And because I didn't want to face that, because I didn't want anyone in my life to see what's behind the wall, I made sure that in order to avoid feeling those feelings behind that dam, I put the spotlight back on the other person. So what that did was cause the other person to always reflect on what they're doing wrong or what they could do better. And that's, unfortunately, that's abuse. That's abusive behavior. And I had to change my life in order to change that behavior. I had to deal with my coping mechanisms. I had to put a crack in the dam. I had to allow some of that water out. And the reason I'm telling you that is because sometimes emotionally abusive behavior does not change until there's a crack in the foundation. And that foundation, in this example, is a dam. It's the resistance. They resist because they don't want to expose their vulnerabilities and their fears and their insecurities, because if they do, it could trigger up their fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of whatever. The insecurities that we walk around with, the abusive people typically have more of, or they're stronger inside of them. And we all have insecurities of some sort. At least most of us have insecurities that we need to learn to either live with and be okay with, and accept that they're ours and not someone else's. Don't push it off onto anyone else. Just accept that's who we are. Or if we don't want to live with those things and we want to hide those things or repress them, we might build that dam ourselves. And when we do, then other people feel like they have to accommodate. They have to work us into their life somehow, and they have to change for us, but we don't have to change for them. And so the dam that the abuser puts in front is so solid, and this is my main point today. It's so solid that you will never get to the water. You'll never get to the insecurities. You'll never get to the vulnerabilities, because they don't want to allow you to get to it. They don't want you to see what's behind that dam. And the only way, this is my metaphoric example here, the only way to get them to stop hurting you is to put a crack in that foundation. And the only way to do that is to give them something to fear that's more than what they already fear. And what that means, and I've said this time and time again, is accountability. This is the only way I've ever seen someone crack that foundation, is that either something big has to happen, an atomic bomb needs to hit that dam, or the threat of something big needs to happen. I'm going to launch this atomic bomb on your dam, so you better change or else. That's the big stuff. The big stuff might be, I can't take this anymore, I'm leaving. That's pretty big. That's going to be a big loss for most people. I can't take it anymore, you better change or else. That sounds like a threat. That could be a threat. And if they believe it's a threat, it could be enough for them to finally break their trance. It could be the threat they needed to finally snap out of it. Because when I was in my trance, nothing snapped me out until the person left me. And by the time they left me, their heart was locked tight. It was shut. It was sealed. It was welded shut. There was no way back in. They were not going to allow that to happen to them again. Good for them. Absolutely. I promote that. I support that. If someone is dangerous in your life and they show no signs of changing, you might have to lock your heart shut if they show no signs. But I believe that there needs to be at least a moment, a conversation where you say, this has to end. This has to stop. And of course, pick your battles wisely. If they're physically dangerous, you don't really want to have a conversation like this. This is where you need to plan your escape or plan something so that you can avoid being hurt. But I'm also here to say that emotional abuse is hurtful and it's long lasting, sometimes even longer, well, often even longer than physical abuse. The bruises go away in physical abuse. As much as I definitely don't want to have that happen to you, and I hope it never happens to you, but unless it was really severe, the physical pain usually goes away. But the emotional pain, both from emotional abuse and physical abuse, can last a long time. And because of that, that's why it's important to understand that the abuser may be in this trance and they can't break their own trance because the person they've been hurting hasn't given them enough to worry about. There's not enough fear for their dam to start cracking. That's a weird analogy, I know, but having all of that they're protecting behind the dam, all those insecurities, all those fears, if you realize just how thick that dam is, you realize just how big of a step that needs to be taken in order to just put a crack in it. Just start somewhere. And this is why I always say the accountability aspect of this. The accountability aspect is this has to stop or else. Now, I'm not saying you say it that way. Some people, you actually have a real conversation and say, look, I don't want to be hurt anymore. Please stop doing this. Will you stop doing this? It can start with that simple thing, simple question. Will you stop doing this, please? And some people will try to turn it around. Well, you're hurting me too. You're hurting me too. And my response is always, you know what? That might be true. Let's talk about that. But first, I want to know if you'll stop hurting me. I want to know if you'll stop doing this behavior. And again, if they're quite clever and manipulative, they're going to turn it back around and say, I'll stop if you stop. I'll stop hurting you if you stop hurting me. And at that point, you realize that it's a very circular argument. It keeps coming back to you. And at this point, I would say stop arguing about it. I would say, let's not talk about this anymore because it's clear that you know you're hurting me and you keep turning it back on me and I'm doing my best. And maybe you think you're doing your best, but I'm not as resilient as you. I'm not as tolerant as you. If you really believe that I'm hurting you and you are resilient enough to stick around and take it, I can't match that. I can't be that person. I can't continue to take this, what I would consider abusive behavior, or at least I can't consider staying in a situation where the person knows they're hurting me and continues to hurt me and just says they hurt me because I hurt them. It's just not a nice place to be. It's just not a nice way to treat someone else. And then the abusive person might say, well, I don't think you're treating me very nicely either. In fact, and then they start listing all the times they believe you mistreated them or something like that. And at this point, this is where I go with it. You know what? If you really feel that way, then you need to make a decision for yourself. You need to decide what you want in your life. This is you telling the hurtful person, you need to decide what you want in your life. Do you want someone like me who you claim that keeps hurting you? Do you want that in your life? They're going to say, no, I don't want that in my life. I just want you to stop, whatever. And you're going to say, I'm doing the best I can. And I don't think that's going to change because I really believe I'm doing the best I can. And you've hurt me over and over again. You know you have, and you won't stop. And so if you think that I'm going to continue a relationship with somebody who continues to hurt me and knows they're doing it and uses the excuse that I'm hurting them and that's why I'm going to do it, then I don't have the energy for that. I can't be in a situation like that. I can't be in a relationship with somebody who knowingly hurts me. I'm not saying you should say any of this, but really it comes down to that mindset. If they truly believe that you're a hurtful person, then what are they still doing there? That's what I always challenge them with. What are you still doing there if you believe they're hurtful? And then they're going to come up with another excuse, or maybe they'll finally decide, maybe I should take responsibility for what I'm doing. Maybe I should pay attention. Maybe I should reflect. Maybe I should learn what my behaviors are doing to you. And maybe I should turn on some empathy and pretend I'm you. And when I pretend I'm you and I treat myself like this, or I treat you like this, how does that feel? How does that feel being treated that way? Hopefully they say that. But it doesn't always happen. And I believe in personal responsibility. When you're in a situation with somebody who clearly isn't going to change and doesn't want to, then the onus of responsibility comes back to you, and then you have to make a decision for yourself. And that doesn't always mean leaving. It doesn't always mean leaving. It could just mean we have to have a conversation. It has to be a serious conversation, and we need to settle this. It could be that. It could be the start of something good. I didn't realize I was doing that to you. I didn't realize how hurtful I was being, or it didn't seem like it was a big problem, but now I know from your seriousness that it's a big problem. So yeah, we need to look at this. I need to change. A relationship is supposed to be balanced. It's supposed to be two people working together to make something great. You know, I actually have a formula for how to tell if you're the abusive one, the hurtful one, or if you're the victim. This is probably not perfect. This is a formula, but my formula is the person that is willing to do anything to treat the other person better, to change who they are. The person willing to take the most steps to make things work, to make things happen, to make the other person happy, is usually the victim. And the person who doesn't want to change anything is usually the abuser. This isn't always the case. I didn't test this with every single scenario. There are exceptions, I'm sure. I haven't thought of any. But there are exceptions that somebody will come up with out there. But in my personal experience of doing this for over a decade, I've learned that the person who is willing to do whatever it takes to fix things, to heal things, to work on things, is usually the victim. And the person who refuses to do anything and puts all of the responsibility on the other person to change is usually the one who doesn't want to change and is usually the one who becomes the abuser. This is something I've seen over and over again. I've done this. I've changed. I've worked on this. I moved. I switched jobs. I changed a lot about my life for this other person. And then they describe the situation they're in, and they're always the victim. They're always the victim of the abusive behavior. And I'm not giving them an excuse. Sometimes the victim abuses as well. Sometimes the victim does hurtful behavior. Almost always it's reactive abuse, but sometimes not. I'm not saying everyone that's a victim is perfect. I'm just saying, for the most part, The victim is usually the one that's making all the changes and trying, where the abuser doesn't make a single change and doesn't want to and doesn't believe they have to and believes that all the changes should be on the other side. They're not willing to reflect. They're not willing to go inside and tell themselves, maybe I am doing something that is hurting the other person. Maybe I do need to figure this out. Maybe there's something I need to change within me. And when you don't believe you're wrong in a relationship, in any type of relationship, when you don't believe you have the capability of being wrong, then you usually don't take responsibility for your own behavior. And again, there are exceptions, but when we're talking about the typical emotionally abusive relationship, that's the formula that always seems to pan out correctly. That is what I usually see happening. So if this helps with an argument inside a relationship that you're in, you might want to bring that up. Are you willing to change? Are you willing to look inward and change something about yourself? Are you willing to change behaviors that you do? Because if they say no, 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 and no, now you know you're dealing with somebody who isn't willing to see that they might be part of the problem or the entire problem. They may just go forward believing they're right and putting all of the problems and responsibility to change on you. And that's not a relationship. That's not how a relationship works. You're supposed to work at it together. And yes, you're supposed to give in sometimes. Both of you, not just you. You're supposed to give in. Both of you are supposed to give in and make some compromises, make some changes. And there shouldn't be resentment in these changes. This is another thing I see a lot. There's a lot of resentment. Oh, I'm going to make this change, and I made this change, and I did it for you. There's going to be that resentment feeling. And if that's happening, then they didn't make the change for the relationship. They didn't make the change to make things better. They made the change just to throw it in your face or something. They didn't want to do it, and now they resent it, and they resent you, and that causes more hurtful behavior. So this is something that can come up as well. You just have to be careful when you start having conversations about putting effort into the relationship and trying to meet on common ground, making some compromises, both of you, so that you can create something copacetic, something enjoyable, something comfortable, and it's not one-sided. You don't want the ship to list. You want it to stay afloat. And if it's floating, that's a good thing. If it's not, you have to have some hard conversations and always pick your battles wisely, because some conversations are really not worth having, and you just have to decide what's the best route to take if you can't even have a conversation. Sometimes it's tough. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this is helpful in some way. Share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. You can download the workbook today to help you determine if you're in an emotionally abusive relationship. I'll give you the tools to pinpoint the specific unhealthy behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad. If you're in a difficult relationship and you want to know what your next steps should be, the assessment and the workbook will help you make decisions that are right for you. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. Now, if you've discovered that you're doing emotionally abusive behavior and you'd like to change that about yourself, sign up for the Healed Being program over at healedbeing.com. The show exists to remind you that you're not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant, because you are. We'll talk again soon.